I wasn't snooping. That's the first thing I told myself, and still tell myself every time I replay that moment in my head. I wasn't looking for secrets or trying to dig up dirt on my husband. I was just trying to find the receipt for the dishwasher we bought last year, the one that started making that awful rattling noise every time it ran. The folder was buried deep within a side partition of his filing cabinet, behind a bunch of tax returns and warranty papers. It had no label, no markings, just a plain black folder held shut by an elastic band that looked like it hadn't been stretched in years. I almost didn't notice it, but I did. And when I pulled it out, my hands trembled. Not because I knew what I would find, how could I, but because something about it felt wrong. Not out of place, exactly, just too carefully hidden. Like it had been waiting. I hesitated, sitting cross-legged on the floor of the study, with the drawer still open beside me. The house was silent, aside from the ticking of the wall clock. He was out getting groceries. I had maybe 30 minutes. Tops. Still, I hesitated. I shouldn't have opened it. But I did. Inside were documents, dozens of them, neatly arranged, aged just enough to prove authenticity but not too old to seem irrelevant. The first page was a birth certificate, but not his. At least, not the name I knew. My husband's name is Daniel Bennett. The birth certificate said Gregory Andrew Hall. I froze. I flipped to the next document, an out-of-state driver's license with the same unfamiliar name but his exact face. Same eyes, same jawline, same slight scar above the brow. But the name didn't belong to the man I married. I scanned through the folder with growing panic. There were university records, medical documents, even a handwritten letter addressed to someone named Melissa. At the bottom of the folder was a newspaper clipping, yellowed at the edges. The headline read, "Local woman vanishes after disturbing 9 centimes, call fiancé questionnaire." I stopped breathing. I reread that headline 4 times before I dared to look at the accompanying photo. It was grainy, probably scanned from an older print. A woman in her late 20s, brunette, soft eyes, the kind you trust. And next to her, though slightly out of frame, was Daniel, or Gregory, or whoever he really was. My vision tunneled. A cold wave of nausea spread through me. I felt the blood drain from my face, my limbs. I had the terrifying sense that the ground beneath me had shifted, just a fraction of an inch enough to destabilize the entire architecture of my reality. I put everything back in the folder, sealed it tight, and slid it right back into the drawer. I closed the cabinet as if it might scream. I moved quickly, quietly, erasing every trace that I had ever been there. When he walked through the front door 12 minutes later, humming softly to himself and holding a bag of groceries like he had nothing in the world to hide, I smiled back at him. I smiled like nothing was wrong. But everything was. Later that night, when he was in the shower, I opened my phone to the anonymous message I had received exactly 3 days earlier. I had deleted it, but somehow I knew it would still be there in my backup texts. It was, "You deserve to know who he really is." At the time, I had dismissed it as spam. Maybe a prank. Maybe someone trying to mess with our marriage. But now I wasn't so sure. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my throat, and for the first time since marrying Daniel Bennett, I asked myself a question I never thought I'd have to ask. Who the hell is sleeping next to me every night? And more importantly, what happened to the woman in that photo? When I first met Daniel, he was standing by the window at a mutual friend's holiday party, drinking bourbon and watching the snow fall like it was some kind of quiet performance meant just for him. He didn't speak much that night, but when he finally did some half-joking comment about how every snowflake feels personal, until it melts, his voice struck me like a song I didn't realize I already knew by heart. He had this steadiness about him, the kind that doesn't demand attention but commands it anyway. While everyone else in that room was buzzing with laughter and clinking glasses, Daniel existed like a calm eye in the middle of a storm. I was drawn in instantly. Not because he tried to charm me, he didn't, but because he made stillness feel like something sacred. We started seeing each other a few weeks later. He never rushed anything. Our dates weren't flashy, coffee shops, bookstores, evening walks through quiet neighborhoods, but they felt intentional. Every conversation with him felt like he was choosing to be fully present. No phone distractions, no small talk, Just attention. Deep and unwavering. He told me he worked in cybersecurity. That made sense. He had the kind of mind that liked order, patterns, silence. He said he had moved around a lot growing up, which explained why he didn't seem to have any strong ties to one city. I didn't question much. We were adults. People had pasts. Within 6 months, we were living together. Our apartment was small, sunlit, and filled with the smell of roasted coffee and worn-out novels. He cooked more than I did. He liked jazz in the mornings and complete silence when he worked. I learned to navigate his moods. He wasn't temperamental, but there were times he withdrew, went silent for hours. I chalked it up to the nature of his job, or maybe a childhood full of instability. He never raised his voice, never called me names, never once made me feel unsafe. To everyone else, we looked perfect. My friends and be it me. They'd say things like, "He's so calm, it's refreshing," or, "God, he looks at you like you're the only person in the room." And I'd smile, not because I was trying to sell the fantasy, but because I genuinely believed it. I'd never been in a relationship that felt this even. No unnecessary drama, no guessing games, just two people building something quiet and solid. When he proposed, it wasn't dramatic. No public spectacle. He just asked me one morning while we were still in bed, the sheets tangled around our legs and the smell of rain drifting through the open window. He said, "You feel like home." I don't know how else to say it. I cried. Not because it was surprising, but because it felt inevitable. We got married the following spring. A small ceremony. Just a few friends. No family on his side, he said his parents had passed. And he was estranged from his only sibling. That sounded tragic. And I remember holding his hand a little tighter at the altar, promising myself I'd be the family he never had. The first year of marriage was golden. We didn't fight. We didn't keep secrets. Or so I thought. He was attentive without being overbearing. Supportive, but never suffocating. When I had a bad day, he didn't try to fix it. He just made sure dinner was ready. The lights were dim, and the silence between us felt comfortable, not empty. We rarely talked about the future in concrete terms, no baby names, no 5-year plans, but there was an unspoken understanding that we were in this for the long haul. Then, somewhere around the 2-year mark, I began to notice small things. Nothing dramatic, just off. He stopped using his laptop in the living room like he used to. Started closing doors when he took calls. Once, I walked into the office while he was working, and he quickly minimized a window on his screen. He smiled and said, "It was a surprise for me." I believed him. Because why wouldn't I? We trust the people we love. We trust them so much that we stop registering the red flags as warnings and start interpreting them as quirks. I told myself that Daniel was just private, not secretive. I convinced myself that his past, however blurry, was behind him. I even defended him when friends asked about his family. He doesn't talk about them much. It's complicated, I'd say. And they'd nod, their curiosity only half satisfied. Sometimes I wonder, if someone had told me then what I know now, would I have listened? Probably not. Because back then, Daniel was still the man who brewed my favorite tea without being asked, who kissed my shoulder while I washed dishes, who remembered that I hate cilantro and that I can't sleep without background noise. Back then, Daniel was still the man who felt like home. Now I'm not even sure his name was ever really Daniel. It didn't start with something dramatic. There were no lipstick stains, no strange perfume lingering on his shirts, no mysterious charges on the credit card bill. It started with silence. Or maybe more accurately, the shift in silence. Daniel had always been a quiet man, but in the beginning, his silence had felt intentional, like space held open for thought, for care, for peace. But somewhere in our second year of marriage, his silence began to feel strategic. He stopped narrating the little things, like how his day went, or what he overheard on the subway, or what he was working on. At first, I didn't notice. Life was busy. I was in the middle of switching jobs, and we were thinking about moving to a bigger place. But the distance between our words stretched, and then stayed stretched. I remember one night in particular. I came home late from work, exhausted, hungry, irritated. I walked in and found him sitting on the couch in the dark, laptop open, the only light coming from the screen. When I asked him why he hadn't turned on a lamp, he looked up and smiled like nothing was off. Said he liked the quiet, that it helped him think. I laughed it off, kissed his head, and went to the kitchen. But that image stuck with me for days. His face glowing coldly in the blue-white light of the screen, completely still, completely focused, and completely somewhere else. Then there were the nights he didn't come to bed. He used to be predictable, brushed his teeth at 10:30, read a few pages of whatever non-fiction book he was into that week, then curled up beside me. But that routine started to slip. Some nights I'd wake up at 2 a.m. and find his side of the bed untouched. I'd find him in the study, eyes fixed on the screen, fingers poised but unmoving on the keyboard. He'd say, "Just wrapping something up," and I never asked what, because I trusted him. And I didn't want to be the kind of wife who policed her husband's time. But trust, I've learned, is a slippery thing. You can't always tell when it's holding you up and when it's making you blind. I started noticing his phone habits next. Daniel used to leave his phone around the house, on the coffee table, kitchen counter, even the bathroom sink. But suddenly, it was always with him, always face down. And he started putting it on airplane mode while he worked, which he claimed was to avoid distractions. Once, when we were watching a movie, his phone buzzed. He didn't check it, didn't even flinch. But I noticed the name flash across the screen for a half second before it dimmed. Unknown number. That, by itself, is meaningless. People get spam calls all the time. But Daniel didn't react the way most people do. He didn't ignore it with annoyance. He ignored it with precision. Like he expected it. Like he needed to pretend he didn't see it. Still, I said nothing. Because I was afraid that asking meant admitting something was wrong. He also stopped mentioning people from work. Daniel never had a large social circle, but he used to tell me stories, funny things a colleague said, a difficult client, random office drama. Then all of that vanished. It was as if he worked in a vacuum. When I asked about it, he shrugged and said, "There's not much to say. Same old, same old." Then there was the key. One afternoon, I was cleaning the junk drawer in the kitchen, the one where we kept spare batteries, expired coupons, dead pens. At the bottom, wrapped in an old tissue, was a small silver key I'd never seen before. I brought it up casually that evening. "Hey, do you know what this opens?" He looked up from his book, blinked once, and said, "No idea. Maybe it's from the old mailbox?" But we never had an old mailbox. We'd moved into this apartment together. Every key we'd ever had was still hanging by the door. I tucked the key away in my jewelry box, not because I thought it meant something then, but because some part of me, the part I wasn't ready to listen to yet, didn't believe him. It's funny how we try to rationalize things, how we turn full-body unease into a shrug, how we explain away the goosebumps. I told myself Daniel was just stressed, that his job was demanding, that I was being paranoid. But when I looked at our wedding photo one night, him smiling softly, me glowing beside him, I felt something cold slip beneath my skin. Not fear, distance. It was like I was looking at a stranger, someone who looked exactly like the man I married, but whose story I no longer understood. Then came the day he snapped. We were in the kitchen, and I mentioned a woman from the gym who told me she knew someone who worked in cybersecurity. I said it lightly, joking about how small the world was. Daniel dropped the glass he was holding. It shattered at his feet. He cursed not loudly, but sharply, and immediately knelt down to clean it up. I rushed over, concerned, but he waved me off. "It slipped," he muttered. But his hands were shaking. That night, I couldn't sleep. That was the moment something clicked. Or maybe, cracked. All the small things I'd brushed aside, his silence, the key, the phone, the emails I never saw, the names he never mentioned, suddenly felt like puzzle pieces I had been too scared to assemble. And once I started to assemble them, they formed something I couldn't ignore. A man who had built an airtight life with me, without ever really letting me inside it. The folder felt heavier the second time I opened it. It was late past midnight, and Daniel had fallen asleep on the couch, half watching a documentary about oceanic fault lines. I moved like a ghost through the apartment, heart pounding in my ears, Every creak of the floorboards felt amplified, every flicker of light from the hallway a possible signal that I was being watched. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to know. I sat cross-legged on the floor of our bedroom with the folder in my lap, the bedside lamp casting a small circle of light like a spotlight over the past. The birth certificate was still on top. Gregory Andrew Hall, born in Charleston, South Carolina. Same birthday as Daniel. Same face, but not the same name. Not the man I thought I married. I flipped to the next page. A driver's license from North Carolina, issued 7 years ago. Same name, same face. Address listed, a small rural town I'd never heard of. The license had expired the year before I met him. Below it, clipped with a rusty paperclip, was a library card, an old insurance form, and a letter from a university registrar office confirming enrollment under the same name. Major Computer Science. Dates 2009 to 2012. So far, nothing illegal. Just a different life. A different identity. One he had apparently scrubbed clean and replaced with Daniel Bennett. I kept going. The next document made my fingers go cold. It was a letter from a law firm in Georgia. The header read, Gordon and Blair, Attorneys at Law. It was addressed to Gregory Hall, dated 6 years ago, referencing an updated estate division request. Attached was a copy of a will, not his, someone named Patricia L. Hall. His mother? The will outlined the division of assets following her death. Gregory was named as the sole beneficiary. But here's what made my stomach twist. The letter included a handwritten note stapled to the back. Gregory, please don't let this change who you are. Your sister needs you. Be careful who you shut out. Aunt Miriam. I froze. A sister? Daniel had always claimed to be an only child. Or at least estranged. He said there was no family, that he was alone in the world when we met. But here, on paper, was the truth. He had a sister. And someone, an aunt, apparently had urged him not to abandon her. I wanted to stop reading. Some part of me begged to close the folder and burn it all, to pretend I never saw it. But curiosity is cruel. It pretends to offer closure when really, all it gives is gravity pulling you deeper into something you can't escape. There was more. Photos. Printed photographs. Some faded, some crisp and recent. Most were of Daniel No, Gregory at various ages, a teenager on a dock, a college student with a shaggy haircut and braces, a man in his 20s at a birthday party. But in nearly every photo, the same woman appeared. She looked like him. Same jawline, same dimple when she smiled, same dark eyes. His sister, in one picture, she was blowing out candles while he stood behind her, arms around her shoulders. Another showed them at the beach, holding hands as children. The last photo, the one at the bottom of the pile, was different. She wasn't smiling in that one. She looked pale, tired, scared. The photo was grainy, like it had been taken from a distance, possibly without her knowing. She stood outside what looked like a motel, holding a purse tightly against her chest. Her eyes darted toward the camera. Scrawled on the back in shaky handwriting, 3 weeks before she disappeared. I felt my throat close. Disappeared? I went back to the newspaper clipping I had glimpsed before. This time, I read it in full. Local woman vanishes after disturbing 911 call. Authorities are investigating the disappearance of Melissa Hall, 28, who was last seen leaving her apartment on Thursday evening. Neighbors report hearing raised voices the night before her disappearance. A 911 call was made from Melissa's phone at 2:13 a.m., lasting less than 30 seconds. The transcript of the call, released by police, includes a female voice whispering the words, "I can't do this anymore. He knows." The call ended abruptly. Police questioned Melissa's fiancé, Gregory Hall, who claimed not to have seen her that evening. He was not charged. As of now, Melissa is still considered a missing person. My hands were trembling so badly I had to press them against the floor. He had told me his sister died in a car accident. That was what he said when I asked about family early in our relationship. He had spoken quietly, avoided eye contact, said it was painful to talk about. I had believed him. Why wouldn't I? But now I was staring at proof that not only had she not died in an accident, she had vanished under suspicious circumstances. And the man I married had been the last person to see her. I felt sick, but the folder wasn't done with me. There was one final section, tucked into a plastic sleeve at the back. A series of printed emails. No names, just sender and recipient addresses. The messages were cold, methodical, discussions of changing names, referrals to identity specialists. One thread referenced a clean relocation package. Another mentioned destroying hard drives. It wasn't just someone starting fresh. It was someone erasing themselves and then building a new life. With me, I sat there, surrounded by paper and shadows, unable to move. Every breath felt borrowed. Every memory felt counterfeit. How much of our life was real? The breakfasts, the jazz music, the soft kisses on the back of my neck. Did he ever really love me? Or was I just the second act? A safer cover? I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But I couldn't do either. I had to close the folder. I had to put everything back exactly where I found it. Because if he knew I had seen it, if he sensed anything off, I didn't know what he was capable of. Because now I wasn't just living with a liar. I was living with someone who might have made his own sister disappear. And somehow, I knew I was next. The first time I saw her face, I thought it was just recognition born of repetition. I'd been staring at her photos for hours, trying to understand who she was, how she fit into this twisted puzzle I was only beginning to see clearly. But then it hit me, not just a sense of recognition, a memory. I had met her. I don't remember the exact day. It must have been early in my relationship with Daniel, maybe 6, 7 months in. We had gone to a cafe outside the city, one of those quiet, overgrown places that looked like it belonged to a different decade. I remember the way he kept looking at the window instead of me, like he was waiting for someone. And then she walked in. At the time, I thought she was just another customer. But now, as I pieced it together, I remembered how Daniel had tensed, how he had stopped talking mid-sentence, eyes locked on her as she walked past our table. I had even made a joke, "Friend of yours?" To which he replied a bit too quickly, "Number never seen her before." She didn't look at us, just ordered a coffee to go. But something had passed between them, a silence too sharp to ignore, a presence that made my skin prickle then and now, turned my stomach inside out. I went back to the grainy photo from the folder, her last known picture, Melissa Hall. That was her. There was no doubt anymore. I had seen her, briefly, months before she vanished from every record, every news article, every search database, and Daniel Gregory had lied, right to my face. I wanted to tell myself it was coincidence, that I was remembering it wrong. But memory, when it snaps into place, doesn't give you that luxury. It's not a gentle realization. It's a collapse, a structure falling inward, crushing everything you thought you knew. And the more I let that memory settle, the more terrifying it became. Because if Melissa had shown up at that cafe, then she hadn't disappeared yet. That meant he lied about the timeline too. He told the police he hadn't seen her the night she vanished, but I had been with him a few weeks before that, and she was still alive. And from the look on her face that day, she wasn't just passing by. She was watching us. She was watching me. Suddenly, every benign moment in that relationship turned radioactive. The subtle questions Daniel had asked me early on, where I worked, if I had family nearby, whether I ever thought about moving out of state, those weren't small talk. They were data points, calculations, tests. And Melissa, was she trying to warn me? Or follow him? Had she known what he was capable of? Had she seen him do something that made her run? Or worse, was she trying to protect me? The thought gutted me. I had to know more. About her. About what really happened. About whether he'd done it before. I stayed up the entire night, combing through everything I could find on Melissa Hall. Most of the articles were brief standard missing persons coverage, dated 6 years ago. The early stories painted her as unstable. They quoted anonymous sources saying she'd been difficult, withdrawn, struggling with anxiety. But then I found a local forum thread archived, barely visible in Google search layers, started by someone named Hall Watcher. The post was dated 3 months after Melissa disappeared. The title was simple: He's not who he says he is. He's done this before. The body of the post was a torrent of half-coherent rage and fear. Whoever had written it claimed to be a family member of Melissa and accused Gregory Hall of controlling behavior, isolation tactics, and emotional manipulation. They claimed Melissa had been trying to break things off, but he wouldn't let her. They also wrote something that made my spine lock up. He moved her away from everyone, made her quit her job, cut off her phone, said it was for their future. When she tried to leave, she vanished. I looked around my apartment, suddenly seeing it differently. Daniel had never asked me to quit my job, but he had discouraged me from taking promotions that required travel. He had offered to help consolidate my digital life password managers, shared accounts. He said it was about safety. He insisted on using cash for most of our grocery shopping, said he didn't like being tracked. At the time, I'd thought it was quirky. Now it looked like a blueprint. Control doesn't always arrive in chains. Sometimes it arrives with flowers. Sometimes it holds the door open and smiles. I went back to the folder, rereading the note from Aunt Miriam. Your sister needs you. Be careful who you shut out. Had Gregory shut her out? Or silenced her? I couldn't answer those questions. But what I could answer, what I had to answer, was this. Was I next? Was I being groomed for the same fate? A slow fade, a whispered lie, a vanishing act that no one would question until it was too late. I began documenting everything. I bought a burner phone. I took photos of every document in the folder. I wrote down every strange detail I could remember, dates, locations, the cafe encounter. I emailed it all to a trusted friend under the subject line, in case something happens to me. And then I made an appointment with someone who could help me disappear if I needed to. Because now I knew something I couldn't unknow. The face I had seen in that cafe was real. The fear in her eyes wasn't imagined. And the man I loved had recognized her, too. He just hoped I never would. The moment I decided to fight back, I stopped being his wife. At least, not in the way he had always known me. I stopped asking for explanations, stopped filling silences with nervous laughter, stopped offering reassurances he never earned. Instead, I smiled more. I cooked his favorite meals. I let him think I was still in the same story he had written for us, sweet, predictable, safe. But beneath the surface, I was becoming someone else, someone he didn't expect. I started with the bank accounts. Daniel had always been careful with money, but not controlling. Or at least, he pretended not to be. We had a shared account for bills, but we kept separate savings. That was his idea. Just in case, he said early in our marriage, people need their own safety nets. Now, I saw the irony. I began transferring small amounts of money every few days just under the threshold that would trigger a bank notice. I created a new savings account under a different name, using a friend's address for paperwork. It wasn't much at first, but it was enough to make me feel like I had a door open. Next came the digital trail. Daniel was in cybersecurity. He knew how to cover his tracks and how to check mine. So I stopped searching anything suspicious on our home Wi-Fi. I used the burner phone I'd bought to research identity protection services, secure storage units, private investigators. I learned how to detect if someone was tracking my phone, mirroring my screen. I learned how to encrypt my cloud files. I learned how to disappear without leaving a hole behind. It was terrifying how easy it was. Every step I took brought me closer to something I hadn't felt in weeks: control. But playing normal around him was the hardest part. I had to suppress every instinct to flinch when he touched me, to pull away when he kissed me goodnight. I had to nod when he told a story I now knew was a lie. I had to laugh at jokes that, in hindsight, sounded more like warnings. He started to notice the shift, but not in the way I feared. "You've been different lately," he said one night as we stood in the kitchen. He was drying a glass, his eyes watching me too closely. "Different how?" I asked, slicing a lemon without looking up. "I don't know. More peaceful." I almost laughed, because what he saw wasn't peace. It was silence sharpened into a blade. I was planning my exit, but first, I needed proof. The folder in his drawer was a start, but I needed something more concrete, something that tied him directly to Melissa's disappearance, or at least proved his identity fraud. So I set a trap. It started with a question casual, thrown over dinner as if it had just popped into my head. "Hey," I said, "didn't you once mention a road trip you took through the Carolinas?" He blinked, just for a second, but I saw it. "I don't think so," he replied, chewing slowly. "I could have sworn you said something about Charleston. A little diner you like there?" He shook his head. "Never been." "Lie." I let it go. But I noted the way his grip on the fork tightened just slightly, the way he finished his meal without speaking much after that. The next day, I made a call to a private investigator, a woman named Sarah McMillan, recommended through a secure forum for women escaping abusive relationships. I didn't tell her everything, not yet, but I gave her enough. Name, possible aliases, last known location, the missing persons report. "I can't promise a criminal case," she said, "but I can dig, and I can get you options." That's all I needed. I began keeping a go bag in my car. Cash, clothes, copies of every document I'd scanned, a flash drive with everything I knew. I made sure the car had a full tank every night. And then one afternoon, I came home early and found him in the study. He didn't hear me at first. He was at the filing cabinet, the one where the folder had been. He had it open. The folder was in his hand. My stomach dropped. He was flipping through it slowly, like someone reacquainting himself with an old friend. His face was expressionless, calm, focused. I backed away before he could see me. That night, he was unusually warm. He made dinner, poured wine, Saturday across from me at the table, with that familiar half-smile, the one that used to make me feel safe. "You know," he said, "I was thinking we should take a trip." "A trip?" I asked. "Yeah. Get away for a bit. Clear our heads. Maybe go off the grid." My pulse quickened. "That sounds nice," I said. He reached across the table and took my hand. "I just want us to reconnect. You've seemed distant." "I've had a lot on my mind," I replied softly. He nodded. "We all have secrets. I just hope none of yours will hurt us." That was the moment I knew. He suspected me. He was watching too, and the game had changed. I excused myself to the bathroom and locked the door behind me. I stared at my reflection, wondering if I would make it out, wondering how close I was to becoming Melissa, wondering if he already knew everything, and this was just his way of saying goodbye before I vanished. I sat on the floor, heart thudding, and texted Sarah. "It's time. What's my next step?" She replied 2 minutes later. "Get out tonight. I'll send coordinates. Go silent after this." I stared at the screen, the reflection of myself warped in the glass. I didn't look like the woman who fell in love with Daniel. I looked like a ghost trying to outrun her own obituary. And maybe that was a good thing, because the woman Daniel married was gone. In her place stood someone he never planned for. Someone who could vanish before he made her disappear first. I didn't cry when I packed. I thought I might. I thought there would be a moment kneeling in the hallway, folding the sweatshirt he loved, or slipping our wedding photo out of its frame where the grief would split me in half. But there was no grief left to feel. Only clarity. The night before, I'd received the final message from Sarah. A set of coordinates. A rental car waiting under a fake name. A key in a magnetic box under the rear bumper. A place to start over, for now. She didn't promise safety, just space. That was all I needed. I started packing at 3:12 a.m. Daniel was asleep. His breaths were steady, slow. He had started sleeping with his arms across his chest, like a man trying to hold something in place. He didn't know I had already slipped away from him. Emotionally, mentally, tactically. I packed one small duffel bag, clothes, a burner phone, my real phone wiped clean, a flash drive tucked into my makeup bag, one photo of me as a child with my father creased and warm from too many years in a wallet. I left the rest behind. The books we bought together, the ceramic mug with the chip on the rim, the postcard from our honeymoon, the quilt his mother never made, but someone clearly had. All of it belonged to that life, not this one. I had written a note, but I burned it. I realized there was nothing I could write that wouldn't invite questions. Nothing I could say that wouldn't betray the silence I'd spent weeks building. So instead, I did what he never expected. I vanished. At 4:07 a.m., I walked out the front door, The world was still dark, suspended in that fragile hour where everything holds its breath before dawn. I walked past our mailbox without looking at it, past the rose bush he insisted we plant, past the neighbor's porch where we once drank wine and laughed like everything in our lives was real. The air was cool, sharp. Every step felt like glass under my feet, not because it hurt, but because I didn't want to break the silence. I found the rental car exactly where she said it would be. I slid into the driver's seat and sat for a moment, staring at the house from the rearview mirror. No lights turned on, no movement, just the quiet shell of a home built on lies. I turned the key. The engine hummed to life. And I drove. Out of the neighborhood, past the grocery store where he used to pick out the ripest avocados like it meant something. Past the road where we once got a flat tire and ended up slow dancing to no music under the stars. I didn't look back. Because looking back was for people who still had the luxury of doubt. I drove for 8 hours straight. No music, no calls. Just the rhythm of tires on pavement and the hollow echo of everything I'd left behind. Around hour 5, I passed a motel the kind Melissa might have stayed in, and I realized something awful. He had probably stood where I was standing. He had probably driven roads like this. Alone. Planning. Disappearing. Maybe that's why I didn't feel triumphant. I wasn't escaping him. I was becoming him. Someone untethered. Someone half erased. But at least I was doing it by choice. When I finally reached the safe house, Sarah was waiting on the porch. She didn't ask questions. Just opened the door and handed me a phone with a new SIM card and a new name. "Do you want to know it?" she asked. I shook my head. "Not yet." She nodded. Inside was simple, clean sheets, stocked fridge, silence. Everything I needed to start over. Or at least survive. That night, I lay in a stranger's bed and thought about the version of me still sleeping in Daniel's memory. The soft-voiced woman who never doubted him. The woman who smiled too much, who trusted too easily. I thought about her, and I let her be. Because the woman who walked away from that house? She wasn't coming back. It took him 9 days to find me. Not physically. He didn't show up on the doorstep. At least, not yet. But the message came like a knock on the walls I had just started to build. It was an email from an address I didn't recognize, cloaked behind 2 layers of encryption and routed through foreign domains. But the signature at the bottom made it unmistakable. "Yours always, D." I stared at it for 10 minutes before I opened it. My hands didn't shake. Not anymore. That version of me, the one who trembled, had been buried with everything else I left behind. The subject line read, "Let's not rewrite what we had." And the message itself? It was a masterpiece of manipulation. He started by calling me brave. Said he understood why I ran. That it must have been scary to find those papers, to uncover things I wasn't ready for. But that context matters. He told me the identity change wasn't criminal, it was protective. That Melissa had been dangerously unstable. That the story the media told was one side of a complicated tragedy. He said I was seeing ghosts. That I was projecting my fears onto him. That he never wanted me to know that part of his life because it was too painful, not because it was shameful. He said he loved me. He said he still did. And then came the final paragraph, crafted like a noose wrapped in silk. "You're scared now, and I accept that. But if you ever want the whole story, the real story, I'll be here. We don't have to end like this. You don't have to be alone." I didn't respond. Instead, I read it again. And again. And the more I read, the more I realized he still believed he was in control. Even now, even after everything, he thought I would hesitate, that I would question my own memory, my own instincts, that his voice, sweetened by familiarity, could still call me back like a lighthouse. But I wasn't lost anymore. He was. The next day, Sarah called. "We traced the IP," she said. "He used a VPN, but we picked up a login to a rental property under his name. He's not far. 40 miles max." I didn't flinch. "Do I need to run again?" I asked. "No," she said. "Not unless he escalates. But stay alert." He did escalate. Not with violence, with charm. A second email arrived 3 days later. This one included a photo of us. On the beach. The last vacation we ever took together. I remembered that trip. I was sunburnt, exhausted, suspicious. He was all smiles, holding my hand like he was afraid I'd slip through it. Under the photo, he wrote, "I still believe in us." I forwarded it to Sarah. She replied, "Do not engage. This is the test." I knew that, but part of me felt something colder than fear. Pity, because now I could see it clearly. He wasn't trying to fix anything. He wasn't sorry. He didn't feel guilt. He was trying to reset the narrative, reframe himself, make me wonder if maybe, just maybe, I had overreacted. It's a tactic as old as power itself. Rewrite the story so the villain becomes misunderstood, so the heroine becomes hysterical, so the danger becomes a misunderstanding. But the truth didn't need his permission anymore. I wasn't in his version of the story now. I was in mine. Still, I kept every message, every veiled threat disguised as affection, every attempt to bait me into coming back. Not because I was afraid I'd fall for it, because I knew someone, someday, would need to see the pattern, just like I had once needed to. Then, on day 21, came the voicemail. Not a call, just a recording sent through a secured messaging app that hadn't been installed on my new phone. He'd found a way around it. Of course he had. His voice was calm, too calm. "I just want to talk. You owe me that at least. You don't know the whole story. You think you do, but you're wrong. And running won't fix it. You're not safe out there. You don't know what you've gotten yourself into." That last line hit differently. It wasn't about missing me. It was about reminding me that he still believed I belonged to him. But he was wrong. Because what he didn't realize, what men like him never realize, is that fear, once fully burned, becomes something else entirely. Clarity. I wasn't scared anymore. I was finished. And nothing he said could rewrite the story I now carried in my bones. He had tried to erase Melissa, then replace her. And now? Now he was losing the only thing he couldn't control. The narrative. I told myself I wouldn't speak to him again. That I didn't owe him closure, explanation, or kindness. But closure, I've learned, isn't always something you seek. Sometimes it seeks you, forces its way into your silence, demands a reply. It came finally, in the form of a knock. Not on my door, but on someone else's. A neighbor 2 streets over. A man who bore a vague resemblance to someone Daniel might have known. He had shown up asking if Emily lived there. That was the name I'd been using, the cover Sarah had given me. The neighbor said no, but the man didn't believe him. He asked again and again, then left. Sarah was notified within the hour. She told me not to panic, to keep low, that we could move again. But I was done running, so I made a decision. I sent him a message. Just one line. "You have 10 minutes. After that, I call the police." It wasn't bravado. I had no intention of letting him inside. But I knew he wouldn't ignore the invitation. He wouldn't resist a chance to explain himself, to try, one last time, to bend my reality. He arrived in 7. Same calm face. Same careful posture. But his eyes? They were restless. Not fearful. Just searching for the right version of himself to present. He stood on the opposite side of the screen door. "You look tired," he said gently. I didn't reply. "I thought about you every day," he continued, "wondering if you were okay, if you were eating, sleeping, thinking clearly." I let the silence sit, let it rot. He exhaled through his nose, trying to recalibrate. "You don't know the full truth," he said. "I know enough," I replied. His jaw twitched, just slightly. "Melissa wasn't well." "You said she was dead," I said. "She wasn't. She was terrified. I saw it in her face, and I saw it in yours when you lied about her. She ran from help," he said, voice rising just slightly. "I tried to protect her. She was spiraling. She disappeared." He stepped back then, eyes narrowed. The mask cracked, just for a second. "You don't understand what she was capable of." "And now I do," I said, "because I've lived with it." We stood there for a beat, the air between us thick and brittle. "Why are you doing this?" he asked finally. "Because I'm not her," I said, "and you don't get to write my ending." His eyes darkened. I never hurt you. Not yet. That was when I closed the door, locked it, and turned away. He stood there for a moment longer. I didn't watch him leave. I didn't need to. Because, for the first time, I realized something vital. Closure isn't the moment they apologize. It's the moment you no longer need them to. I used to believe the future was something you built together, that it lived in shared calendars, grocery lists, long-term goals whispered in the dark, that it was made of 2 toothbrushes, 2 mugs, 2 names on a lease. I believed that love meant merging softly, fully, until the line between I and we blurred into something warm and safe. But now I know better. The future isn't something you build with someone who rewrites history. It's something you reclaim, piece by jagged piece, after the storm. It's been 5 weeks since I last saw him. 5 weeks since I closed that door. Since I turned away, not just from him but from the version of myself that needed to be chosen, protected, validated. I didn't move again. Sarah said it was safe to stay, at least for now. He hasn't returned. Not yet. But even if he does, he won't find me. Because the woman he knew no longer exists. She was built in response to him, in his shape, under his shadow. She made herself small to fit the story he told. She walked on eggshells wrapped in silk. She smiled when she wanted to scream. She called survival love. But I've buried her now. And in her place is someone new. I don't have a 5-year plan. I don't even have a 5-week one. But every morning, I wake up in a bed that's mine. I make coffee the way I like it, not the way he preferred it. I play music without checking if it bothers anyone. I go for walks without needing to account for where I've been. I keep my phone on. I speak without filtering. And every night I write. I write down what I remember, what I learned, what I want to forget but won't allow myself to. Not because I enjoy reliving it, but because I refuse to erase myself from my own story again. Melissa deserved that much. So do we. Someday, maybe, I'll share this. Maybe with a therapist. Maybe with a courtroom. Maybe with a woman who thinks her bruises are her fault because he never hit her with his hands. Or maybe this story will remain mine alone. And that will be enough. Because for the first time in a long time, my future isn't something I've been invited into. It's something I've claimed. And this time, I'm the only one who gets to write it.